Okay. Do you mind if I sit? Can you see me or should I stand?
No, you know what? Sit, because last week your arm kept getting in the way of the screen.
Oh,
So sit.
that's fair. I mean, the screen is moved over a bit.
And not that
Yeah.
we're missing you.
But I mean, that's fair. The screen does help. Well, hello and welcome again to Shaping the Communion. Welcome to week 2. I guess a brief bit of recap. Here are the hopes that I have for you all who are learning from this class is to one, that you just know more about Anglicanism as a whole, that you understand how the communion, the Anglican communion that is developed, that you understand our core beliefs and ethos as a community, and that it sparks your own interest in our history. Because there's tons of other stories that I will not be getting to because it's quite an interesting history. Next year, possibly. I can do some deep dives in other points in the communion's history. But again, here's this giant definition of what Anglicanism is from the Episcopal Church Dictionary. It's an online dictionary, so if you Google Anglicanism Episcopal Church, this is what pops up. The whole thing's not entirely important, but I did highlight some key words that I think make us more, or two words, but one and the same, via media. Does anyone remember what that means? Brad, I know you know. What's it stand for? Middle way. So we'll be getting more in depth about that next week when we talk about Queen Elizabeth and her reforms to the Church of England. But there is this move in Anglicanism to always find the middle portion between two extremes. So last week, when we talked about Augustine of Canterbury, it was between the Roman Church and the Celtic Church, and Pope Gregory the Great suggested, find what's most pleasing to God. Discern what's good in our church, what's good in their church, and make the new English church. In Elizabethan England, it was the Catholic and Protestant way, so we're going to go in the middle. What's the middle? What will make not everyone happy, but at least the most amount of people content? So this is I would say a rather unique thing in Anglicanism, is that the via media, the middle way, is where we put a lot of our emphasis on. And then it took me a while to get through this because Zoom kept on glitching. But this is Canon Chuck Robertson. He is now the retired Canon to the Ordinary to the presiding bishop. He was that for both Catherine Jefferts Schori and Michael Curry. And Canon to the Ordinary is basically the chief of staff of the bishop. But his area was beyond the Episcopal Church. That was his ministry. So anything that was related to the Anglican Communion, related to our ecumenical partners, related to interfaith dialogue, he was the man who did a lot of that work and saw a lot of that work. But I stole this right from one of his PowerPoints. For him, the definition of Anglican was change and continuity, something old, something new, bonds and boundaries, autonomy and interdependence, rules and relationships, honoring truth, honoring unity. So for him, these three phrases kind of what he saw and understood as Anglicanism. So we changed, we reformed the church, made something new, but we still held a very old belief in, the importance of bishops. And in some sense, the communion is almost a much older version of the church. Bonds and boundaries. So in the Anglican Communion, every church is independent, but we all work together. It's our bonds of our common heritage, our bonds through our own acknowledgement of each other's services, of their own bishops' lineage and apostolic succession, that we see the importance of us working together, of us being a united communion. And then rules and relationships, honoring truth, so we still hold scripture and tradition, but also acknowledging that maybe our unity isn't from us all believing the same thing, but how we pray. That's, again, we have 39 articles, but it's rare that we all really use that in our everyday common worship. The Book of Common Prayer seems to be the biggest uniter for the Anglican Church. So, recapping the last class, the origins of Anglicanism. So this is St. Augustine of Canterbury, the first, I guess posthumously he was granted archbishop. I don't think he was not proclaimed archbishop right in 597. But not much is known about his early life. We know he was born November 13th, 534 in Rome. He was a Benedictine monk. He was the prior of his abbey, St. Andrew's Abbey in Rome. And he was sent by his friend and fellow brother, Pope Gregory the Great, to England in 597. And so he came to the British Isles to start a church, and he already found Christianity there when he got there, Celtic Christianity. And so there's this little conundrum that he had. Augustine sought the advice of his friend Pope Gregory. Since there is but one faith, why are the issues of the church so different? One used the Mass being observed in the Roman Church and another in the churches of Gaul. And here is Pope Gregory's response. You know, my brother, the custom of the Roman Church in which you are well trained. If you have found anything in either the Roman or the Gallican or any other church which may be more acceptable to Almighty God, I am willing that you carefully make choice of the same and diligently teach the English church, which is yet new in the faith, whatever you can gather from the several churches. So, in some sense, what? Yeah. There's this openness that Pope Gregory is giving St. Augustine to find what in the two different churches, the one he knows, the Roman Church, and this church that had been so insular after the Roman Empire left, that developed their own customs, to find what is most pleasing. Did that happen? Maybe. The Roman Church, though much after Augustine, did eventually force the Celtic Church to accept Roman authority and their own traditions. The two biggest ones being the date for Easter. As I mentioned last week, Easter is a very complicated thing to calculate, especially once we divorced it from the Jewish tradition of calculating Passover. So that's why Passover and Easter don't always line up. And the lack of good calendars made finding Easter so much harder. The rule is the first full moon after the spring equinox, and Easter will be the Sunday following. So if the full moon is on March 21st, that's the date that we've chosen for the spring equinox. It's the following Sunday. It's not that Sunday. So, and then that's how we calculate it. But then we have realized spring itself diverged amongst the Roman calendars because their leap years were too frequent. So this is like getting way into the weeds, but Easter has been a very hard time to calculate. It's partially the reason why the Orthodox Church is still on such a different calendar than us. They still use the Julian calendar when we corrected everything and made the Gregorian calendar. But so Rome made them have their own date for Easter. And then monastic tonsure. So a tonsure, again, is the shaving of one's head when you're religious. The Roman one was a circle around the head. We don't really know what the Celtic one looked like. There are some descriptions, a really old bust of an Anglo-Saxon monk, but we don't really understand how it was different. Some say it was like a triangle instead on top of the head. Some says they left the front but shaved the back of the head. Very, very weird. But for some reason, that was an important issue for the Roman Church to be like, we're right, you're wrong, accept our way. But there were instances, especially in England, that the Celtic Church did retain a lot of influence. Celtic Christianity focused a lot of its own spiritual life around monasteries rather than secular clergy, secular being of the world. That's what secular means. So like, I'm secular clergy because I'm not a monk. Monastic clergy are people in orders, a religious order, so Benedictine, Augustine, Dominican, who are ordained, so they would be monastic clergy. But so the Celtic Church monasteries were immensely influential, and that remained so in the English Church. Most of the important cathedrals were monastic cathedrals. They had monasteries attached to them. The monasteries also were the center of religious and spiritual life for towns and cities in England, more so than I would say the rest of Europe. And we also don't know what Augustine did to the liturgy. We know he had Roman liturgical books, but nothing has been preserved for like any edits he may have done, finding, different prayers from the Celtic Church that he added into the Roman liturgy. So we just don't know that. And then things like the Celtic penitential rite didn't just stay and remain in England, but Rome took it because it was so much better than their own rite. So in the Roman Church, during the service, or your act of confession was a public one. You, in the church, would announce your sins, and the priest would absolve you there. In the Celtic Church, it became a matter between you, the priest, and God. So that's where confessionals came from. Confessional booths. Confession stopped being a public display of forgiveness as a private, personal, spiritual one. And the Roman Church liked that. They were like, this is actually better. So the Celtic Church influenced the rest of the Catholic Church at that time. And here were the two themes that really come from Augustine of Canterbury. Discernment of the middle, that whole letter and conversation between Augustine and Pope Gregory does really sound like the Via Media in many ways, finding the middle way. Pope Gregory gave him the leeway to figure out what is the best. Not always well practiced. That's going to be a common theme. Like, finding the middle way isn't always easy because we're human. We want to be right. But that is a theme that does reoccur again and again in Anglicanism, is finding the middle way. And that's ultimately where we resolve most of the issues. And then, who has authority? Later on, even after Augustine, does Rome have the authority to dictate what the Celtic Church was doing? What gave the Pope authority? Is it not better for the locals, the local bishops and local clergy and monastic groups to have say in the orders and affairs of their own people? So, who has authority is one of the common themes. Today is going to be a prime example for that one. Hint, hint. So, today's class, we're focusing on two big moments: Thomas of Becket and Henry VIII. So we'll start off with Thomas of Becket. This is a showing of his assassination, murder in Canterbury Cathedral. He was scalped. He was stabbed in the back, scalped, and then head was cut off by the four knights. So a little background about England in the 12th century. So after the Norman conquest and the rule of William I, the reign of the House of Normandy was quite turbulent. After William I, William II took over, the second son of William, which gets confusing. William Rufus is the one who took over after William the Conqueror, but he mysteriously died in a hunting accident in 1100, childless. So William's younger brother took over, Henry. He became king. There was an older brother to both William Rufus and Henry, Robert. He got annoyed and he revolted. Robert lost the Civil War, and his own son died a decade after that, so there was no claimant from Robert's side of the family. So Henry I, being the only having secured his throne, his own son then died in a shipwreck. And so that started a whole nother succession crisis. When Henry I died in 1135, a man named Stephen of, do I say Blois? Blois. I do not know French. Claimed the throne. He was the nephew of Henry. But then another claimant, Henry's daughter, Matilda, claimed the throne for her own son. I think she wanted it initially, but then her son became the actual one fighting for it. She was given the title Lady of the English. She was never actually crowned, and it's debated if she ruled the country or not. There are some historical discrepancies there. But the civil war between Stephen and Matilda was called the Anarchy, and it lasted from 1138 to 1154. Yes, a long time, went back and forth. It ended with the Treaty of Winchester, and so in 1153, Stephen would remain king until his death, but Matilda's son Henry would take over after his death. Stephen's son had to publicly renounce his own claim to the throne. The treaty only lasted because Stephen died about a year later, and his own son shortly after that. But so I think it's also important to kind of look at how the church was acting during this time, during the anarchy. So when Stephen took over England, he appointed a new archbishop, Theobald of Bec, Archbishop of Canterbury, that is, which was interesting because Stephen even overlooked his own brother, who was the Bishop of Winchester at the time. Stephen feared that Henry would be too powerful if he was made archbishop. And so throughout the Civil War, Theobald remained quite loyal to Stephen. There was one brief period when it looked about halfway through the Civil War where it looked like Matilda's forces were going to win out. Stephen was captured and imprisoned, and so Theobald went to Stephen and requested if he could crown Matilda as queen. And Stephen, captured, thinking he lost, granted that. But then Matilda's primary military leader, Robert of Gloucester, lost the battle, died, I think, actually. And then she never actually captured London. And so then that made her forces kind of just disintegrate. So she kind of lost all steam after that, and so she wasn't crowned, and this was about halfway through. And the popes also were kind of picking sides throughout the entirety of this battle. So the first pope, when it started, Innocent II, chose Stephen's side, made Henry, Stephen's brother, Bishop of Winchester, a papal legate, which is kind of a emissary or diplomat for the Pope. And it usually came with very special privileges, almost kind of being the voice of the Pope in a foreign land. What they said is as if the Pope was speaking it because it was communication took forever. When Innocent died, Celestine, who had a whole papacy of 145 days, but did influence quite greatly the rest of the battle during the anarchy, because he forbid the English from changing the succession laws during his papacy, and that kind of became the standard policy after all the popes following. So there was an attempt by Stephen to follow the French custom of crowning the heir apparent while the king is still alive. So Stephen was going to crown his own son as like a minor king, so that any issues of claims kind of disappeared. And that's what the French did at the time. So King Louis would crown his son before he died, so that there was no question of, is he the legitimate heir? That was not allowed under Celestine. And he generally supported Matilda and the Plantagenet line. She married the Duke of Anjou and supported her family as the next heir to the English throne. It was a very short papacy, though. Again, 145 days. And the next guy, Lucius, was also about a year and a half. The big thing that he did was he entertained an idea from Henry, the Bishop of Winchester, in elevating the Bishop of Winchester from just a bishop to an archbishop that generally comes with some sort of metropolitan status as an archbishop, which would have just added to the friction that the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Archbishop of York had. That is a long-standing feud that didn't really get resolved until about the 1400s, of who is the actual primary Archbishop of England. So kind of an attempt to seek more power, more prestige, and kind of muddy those waters, Henry attempted to become an archbishop and make Winchester a relatively important bishopric in England higher and make it an archbishopship. The papal legate that Lucius sent died in the process of that happening, so nothing ever came of it. Eugene III called a council to end the war and called all bishops to attend, and Stephen refused that order. Theobald, though, not wanting to refuse an order from the Pope, snuck out and went to the council and was like one of 3 bishops in England to go. Eugene was very upset, barred all the bishops that didn't attend from doing ministry until they apologized to Theobald. The sole exception was he required Henry, Stephen's brother, the Bishop of Winchester, to personally come to Rome and apologize to him, the Pope. That would be the penitence for Henry. And Eugene made Theobald the legate or upheld the papal legate status of Theobald for the rest of the anarchy. And so it was in the 1150s when Stephen tried to do the whole, I'm going to make my son the minor king. Theobald absolutely refused to do that. But it does appear that all the bishops wanted the Civil War to start after, that's 16 years of war, of going back and forth of who's king, who has the rightful claim. And so Theobald was quite instrumental in solidifying the Treaty of Winchester that dictated that Stephen's going to remain king for the rest of his life. Stephen's son has to renounce his own claim, and Matilda's son, Henry, will take over after Stephen, making the House of Plantagenet, or the Plantagenet House, as the next dynasty in England.
So the first Plantagenet king is
Henry II. Yep. Henry I is still House of Normandy. So that's the third son of William the Conqueror.
Okay.
Yep. So with all of that context, Thomas of Becket was born pretty much right in the middle of it all. But he was born in London on December 21st, 1119 or 1120. In London, in Cheapside, which Cheapside I found out just meant market side, not cheap, as we implied cheap. I always thought it meant poor side, but I learned that English developed cheap as low quality is a much later etymological statement. But there is a little plaque on that area where he was born. His father was a merchant and later became sheriff of London. And he went to school, but for all accounts, he wasn't that great. Like, he went to school for a decade and never learned Latin, which seems really absurd for, 1129 to not learn Latin. But somehow he was still good, I guess, at math. And his father secured him a position with Archbishop Theobald of Bec. And he was very successful at it. He managed all the estates for Archbishop Theobald to the point that Theobald ordained him a deacon and made him Archdeacon of Canterbury. And because of this success, once Henry II took power in 1154 after Stephen's death, the Archbishop suggested Thomas become the Lord Chancellor, so kind of the chief of staff for the king to oversee the running of the kingdom. And Thomas became really good friends with Henry II during this time. And so much so that Henry II appointed Thomas of Becket to become the Archbishop of Canterbury following Theobald's death. And so he was appointed and elected the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1162. So he was not yet a priest, even. So he was ordained a priest on June 2nd of 1162, and then the very next day consecrated a bishop and enthroned on June 3rd, 1162, which bishops are consecrated, and then the big other important thing is that they're enthroned. We call it installed in the U.S. because we don't like king monastic or monarchical language, so we say installed. But the big thing is for them to sit in the throne. That's how they receive their authority as the bishop diocesan. So that was when he became the archbishop, was sitting on the throne on June 3rd.
Sometimes called the chair.
I mean, it is actually. That is the local cathedral. That the bishop comes. That's the seat they sit on. But there is also in Grace Cathedral a big chair that is the bishop's chair. Like, cathedral means seat or throne. So that's why the big church is a cathedral, not by its size, but the fact that they have the throne. Yep. Because West Kansas, a diocese I've been to once, their cathedral is smaller than this room. But they have a big chair that the bishop sits in. Not even just a big chair, the big chair. But almost, there was a big change when Thomas became the archbishop. Before that, Thomas lived a very lavish lifestyle, even though he was a deacon. He had a ton of money, enjoyed hunting and fishing and jousting with Henry. He had quite the wardrobe. The king sent him to do some sort of diplomatic mission to France, and he brought something like 26 outfits, which for the medieval time, that's a lot of outfits. Had 600 courtiers coming along with him to France at the same time. So he lived quite a lavish lifestyle when he was Lord Chancellor, was granted a ton of lands, but then he became basically an ascetic when he became Archbishop of Canterbury. So he only wore sackcloth underneath all of his fancy garments, but he only wore those because he was the archbishop, not because he felt like he had to. When he was just an everyday bishop, he was wearing sackcloth, like low clothes. He changed his eating styles. He refrained from drinking. So he actually had this really big conversion when he became the Archbishop of Canterbury. He actually took the office quite seriously. And then he also took his position as the Archbishop and taking a vow to the Pope quite seriously as well. And so very quickly into him becoming the Archbishop, Henry was kind of disappointed because he thought he was going to have his right-hand man as, his local authority. He thought he was going to fight for Henry rather than for the Pope, because there were some things that Henry wanted to change that kind of got lost during the anarchy. Henry wanted to return to the royal supremacy that his grandfather had. Essentially, Henry I had this agreement with the Pope that clergy would be vested by the Pope, but they had to swear fealty to the king. I've had to ask a couple people what that means, because none of my history books were really telling them, but I think it's essentially the Pope still wanted to give his own authority and spiritual authority to the bishops once appointed by the king, and invest the pallium, which is the metropolitan. It's the scarf garment around the neck with the 5 crosses. That is the symbol of metropolitan status, which just means oversees a region for the clergy. But the king still wanted some sort of fealty to him, because in England, the clergy had a lot of temporal power in the kingdom themselves. Like, they were members of parliament, though that wasn't fully in existence then, but they owned land and stuff like that. So Henry wanted to return to what the supremacy that his grandfather had. Thomas did not, and that became a sticking point. Henry also wanted the right to try clergy for secular crimes that they commit. That wasn't allowed. In minor orders, so in the medieval church, if you were a lector, an acolyte, subdeacon, clerk, there's all these minor orders that were kind of ordained, sanctioned by the church, and you were considered clergy if you're any of that. And so that basically took 1/5 of the entire male population out from any temporal rule from the king. So if they committed a crime, if they stole, etc., the king could not try them. It was purely the Pope's and the ecclesial court's authority to try those clergy people. Henry didn't like that.
But often they didn't get tried. The book that I read said that often the clergy did nothing happened to them.
Seeking forgiveness helps a lot, doesn't it? When you're above the local law. So yeah, they weren't tried because they would seek confession often, unless it was really heinous. So yeah, it was an issue for Henry that he couldn't try his own crimes in his own country. And Becket also wanted to retake a lot of lands that the archdiocese had lost from the king, some of which, though, were the king's to give. So it became a point of contention, who owned the lands. Once it went to the church, does the church always own it, or does the king take ownership back? all these questions were unanswered. And then there's this whole big exile of Thomas. There was an attempt or an accusation, more or less, of false charges against Thomas, that he wasn't following this Council of Clarendon, and he was going to get tried in King's Court, and Thomas fled. He fled to France, and let me move, oops. Thomas didn't accept them, so he fled to get away from the king. And while in exile, Thomas tried to curry favor with bishops in England and the Pope. The Pope wanted Thomas to wait until spring of 1666. He fled in about November or December of 1164. So wait a little over a year and a half before he did anything, and that's because the Pope was going to make Thomas a papal legate. Once Thomas was made a legate, he started excommunicating Henry's advisors, which obviously bothered Henry. And so both Henry and Thomas continued to ask for papal support, and so more papal legates were sent to resolve the issue, and nothing would happen. Even after 4 years of trying to make something happen, they just couldn't work it out. And the Pope just couldn't outright pick a side. Henry II was too important militarily and politically for the Pope at the time, because the Pope was quarreling with the Holy Roman Emperor in Germany. So Henry II was too important to upset if the Pope needed support from the Holy Roman Empire. So the Pope could not just flat out pick and choose the side of Thomas of Becket, his archbishop. So it wasn't until June of 1970 that King Henry had his son crowned as a junior king by the Archbishop of York, which, see, that is part of the friction between the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Archbishop of York, because in England, the Archbishop of Canterbury is the only one who can crown a king. And so that is how Thomas was able to secure a papal censure against King Henry, and all of the bishops who supported the crowning of Henry the Younger is what he was known as the junior king. And so that forced King Henry to start negotiating. And in July, Thomas and Henry came to terms, and Thomas was allowed to return to England. So he came back in December of 1170. Well, he came, in the process of him coming back, Thomas then issued excommunications to the Archbishop of York, the bishops of Salisbury and London, and a couple other bishops. The bishops appealed to the king, who said, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" There's no agreement if he actually said that. The first written part of that was in 1740, but there are contemporary historians that do talk about Henry just being so fed up with this back and forth with Thomas, especially because he thought Thomas was actually his friend. And then once he gave him this new position as Archbishop of Canterbury, has just been nothing but trouble to him the entire time. But so on December 29th, 4 knights of the King Court, having heard the king's disappointment and frustration with Thomas, went to Canterbury Cathedral, and at 5 p.m. during evensong, murdered Becket right at the cloister door, or right before the cloisters in Canterbury Cathedral. And so after that murder, veneration of Thomas as a martyr started really quickly. Pope Alexander canonized him after 2 years. The monks of Canterbury Cathedral quickly hid his tomb and built a shrine to Thomas Becket in Trinity Chapel, which is right behind the seat of St. Augustine, the cathedra of Canterbury Cathedral, with gold, and there was holes in it where you can actually touch and see the sarcophagus itself. Right after the four knights, Henry did not punish them, but he also did not help them with the Pope. The Pope excommunicated them. They had to go to Rome and to be absolved of their sin of murdering Thomas Becket, they had to become Knights of the Holy Land for 14 years. So they had to go fight in the Crusades. Henry negotiated with the Pope a compromise, or the Compromise of Avranches, where Henry was going to be purged of his guilt. He was never excommunicated, but he was purged of his guilt, but he had to go on crusade. He never went. But there was an act of public humiliation and penance that he did. He walked in sackcloth through Canterbury to St. Dunstan's Church as an act of penitence for the quarreling he had with Thomas Becket. And he also had to remove any custom the Church and the Pope would take issue with in England. So if there's anything of how the monarch and the Church engage with each other, he had to listen to the Pope on that. That was an agreement for his penitence as for this issue with Thomas Becket. And now, the next story. I know we're skipping about 400 years, but in many ways, I kind of see Henry VIII as the culmination of the issue between church and state that we see in Thomas Becket. The issues were never fully resolved between the church and state in England after that, until really Henry VIII. So, again, I think it's important to kind of understand what it looked like before England, before Henry VIII. Politically, the 100 Years had ended in the mid-1400s. England lost almost all of their land in France. And just 2 years later, 2 years later, England was in a civil war. This time that was the War of the Roses from 1555 to 1587. The war ended with Henry Tudor, Henry VII he would become, seized the crown and won the war. His reign was from 1585 to 1509. And what kind of cemented it was Henry was the House of Lancaster. He married Elizabeth of York, and that kind of ended the two warring sides. In post-Civil War, England needed alliances. They lost all of their territory and a lot of wealth coming from the lands in France. He needed help. He needed some sort of protection after, losing and being at war for nearly 100 years and then 30-ish years of civil war. So he married his eldest son, Arthur, to Catherine of Aragon from the Spanish royal family. That's important. Religiously, the popes were losing a lot of power. In the 1300s, ending in the early 1400s, the Avignon papacy was taking place. The Pope moved from Rome to France, especially when they became French popes, as kind of a protection for the Pope. And that kind of started many issues with the Bishop of Rome, that's the title that the Pope is elected to, not living in Rome. And it was kind of seen at the Pope as being a puppet of the French kingdom. Once the Avignon papacy ended, there was something called the Western Schism, or the Papal Schism, and for 30-ish odd, 45-ish odd years, there was more than one pope, upwards of 3 or 4. And that only ended during, in 1417, with the Council of Constance, where all 3 of the current claimants had to resign their claim, and the cardinals elected Martin V as pope. But it took them 45 years to resolve that issue. But in that time of who is my pope, who am I going to listen to, a lot of political power was lost by the pope. There was also rampant corruption, simony, nepotism, clerical misconduct, indulgences, etc. All of that became issues with people and the church. And there was early calls in the 1400s to change. Jan Hus in Bohemia was one of the first people to try to reform the church, bringing it back to some sort of more ideal time. And then in England was John Wycliffe, who wrote a Bible in English, thinking that people should be able to read the Bible in their own vernacular. Novel concept. So Henry VIII became king in 1509, and his reign lasted until 1547. His older brother Arthur died at 17, so he unexpectedly became the heir to the English throne. He was a devout Catholic, criticized many of the reform leaders in the mainland during his early part of his reign, and that granted him the title Defender of the Faith by the Pope. But shortly after ascending the throne, Henry received a papal dispensation to marry his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon. He needed this dispensation because it was barred for a brother to marry his brother's widow. Catherine had, in court, ecclesial court, had to verify that they never consummated the marriage. So it was not seen as actually being wedded, because for the Catholic Church at the time, sex is what consummated the marriage. And this was all to keep the alliance with Spain. England, again, was still not in the best position. They needed the support, military support from Spain, because Spain was a growing empire at this time. I believe at this time they're a part of the Habsburg Empire. I'm not certain on that. But so the issue of succession became paramount for Henry III to continue the Tudor dynasty. And Catherine had a number of children, but most of them died in their infancy or were stillborn. So their first child was born stillborn in 1510. In 1511, Henry had a son named Henry. He lived 52 days. In 1513, a stillborn son. In 1515, a stillborn son. In 1516 is when Mary, she's the only child to survive into adulthood, and she later became queen. And in 1518, they had another daughter, but she was born stillborn. Henry did have one son through an illegitimate means, Richard Fitzroy. He was made a duke, but he died childless in 1533 at the age of 18, I think. And during that time, Parliament was considering changing the laws of succession to allow Richard to become king, because he was illegitimate, the English crown would not recognize him. But there was an attempt, he died in the process though, of them rewriting their laws of succession to allow Richard to take the throne. So Henry began a whole process of trying to get a male heir. And kind of at this time, why it was Henry saw it as important to get a male heir is the rules of succession at this time would mean that a daughter would have a daughter's husband, if she was become the Queen of England, would have the husband would have an equal status. There was an attempt with Mary to, when she did marry, she took the throne, that Philip, her husband, would not be able to lay claim to the English throne, but it makes it far more complicated. It's part of the reason why when Elizabeth II married, her husband became prince consort instead of king, was some of these similar issues. So he wanted a male heir. So he had three options to do that. One was to legitimize Richard Fitzroy, but he died. And that would also require the Pope to acknowledge him. To have Mary, his daughter, wed and hope that she would conceive a grandson for Henry, but she was too young and everyone doubted that she would be able to conceive a child before he died. And the third option was to annul the marriage with Catherine and to marry someone else. He was already seeing Anne Boleyn at this time. What?
Did we know what?
Yes. So we know which one that they chose, was the process of annulling the marriage with Catherine of Aragon. So by 1527, Henry was certain that he wanted to divorce Catherine. So he took the issue with Pope Clement the Seventh. England and the Pope went back and forth for years. The end result was that Henry could not have the marriage annulled. Essentially, it was a pope did not want to disavow the previous pope any sort of like wrong authority in providing that dispensation. So they refused to dissolve and annul the marriage between Henry and the Catherine of Aragon. Thomas Cranmer actually wrote something in support of Henry VIII, who would later become the Archbishop of Canterbury, using Leviticus 20:21 about as a means to delegitimize the marriage between Catherine and Henry.
Do you know what that says?
I can look it up real quick. If a man marries his brother's wife, it is an act of impurity. He has dishonored his brother, they will be childless. That is what Leviticus says. So in the actual acts of leaving Rome, the Archbishop of Canterbury died in 1532. Anne convinced Henry to install Thomas Cranmer as a supporter of the king to the position. And the Pope agreed to the appointment. So Henry appointed him, the Pope agreed with it, not really knowing that the issues that would come after appointing Cranmer the Archbishop. In 1532, without even the marriage being annulled yet, though he already assumed it was invalid from the beginning. Henry secretly married Anne Boleyn, and she conceived a child. Henry... Okay. In 1532, Henry passed the Ecclesial Appeals Act, which forbid any appeal towards the Pope and made any religious appeal have to go to the Archbishop of Canterbury. So in 1533, Cranmer held a trial about the validity of Henry's marriage to Catherine and ruled it null and void, and 5 days later ruled that his marriage to Anne as valid. Henry then passed the Supremacy Act in 1534, which made the monarch the head of the church in England. After all of this, the Pope finally excommunicated Henry VIII.
So how long did it take from when he secretly married
2 years?
until he was excommunicated?
Yeah. I mean, England being an island allowed for, it takes a long time to get to England from Rome. So it was probably harder for the Pope to know what was really going on in England after a while. So the Church of England at the time, Henry VIII became the supreme head of the church. All bishops had to swear fealty to the king in all matters. There was no going to the Pope anymore or dual fealty between the Pope and the king. Not much else changed. There were 10 articles of faith, but they all basically reiterated the beliefs and tenets of the Catholic Church. Believed in all 7 sacraments, belief in special liturgies for Candlemas or Ash Wednesday. Henry didn't really reform the church. He only made himself the head of it. Another big thing that he did, and kind of breaking with the monastic heritage that much of the English church had, in 1536, he dissolved all of the monasteries. And there's a plethora of reasons why he did it. There's 2 acts of suppression. Those were the acts that dissolved the monasteries. The first one being minor orders in 1535. So that is like the Franciscans, any mendicant order. They were first abolished. And then in 1536 were all the major monasteries. Some of the reasons why. Monasteries owned a majority of the land, of which Henry's council wanted the land to increase their own revenue. Henry, though, just ended up selling most of the land to friends and merchants and landowners so that he could then wage war in France. Didn't go well for him in France. They also had a ton of relics in gold and shrines. So the monasteries amassed a ton of wealth and power. So he wanted that. He wanted their wealth and some were quite symbolic. He did destroy the shrine of Thomas Becket, which is very... What is it? Fitting? What's the proper term? It's not ironic. I guess Thomas is the antithesis of what Henry did in many ways. So it's symbolically rather important that Henry destroyed the shrine to Thomas, which became like a huge European pilgrimage site. 2 years after Thomas's death, people in Hungary knew Thomas Becket and his martyrdom and would pray for Thomas. So it makes sense why Henry would destroy that shrine. But then I guess, why is this important? And the big theme that I think is still even an issue today is who has power and who has authority. That's kind of what both these two stories are all about. Where do we find power? Who has authority? And what is their claim to that power and authority? And how do we rationalize that? You may think that, these medieval stories are ancient. I mean, Henry VIII was 500 years ago. But in many ways, the issues that we still have in the Anglican Communion are about power and authority. Who actually has the authority in the Anglican Communion to dictate what us as independent churches can do? So I'm not certain we ever really have resolved who has the proper power and authority. And this candle is the candle of solidarity. It sits where the shrine was in Trinity Cathedral in Canterbury. Right in front of it is the stone where all the pilgrims would sit, and it still has the grooves of where people would stand. But yeah, what are your questions? Yeah.
What is your opinion of Thomas Becket? Is he a good guy or a bad guy?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. Because, in some sense, maybe it's the American in me, but, I don't think the church has any authority in the dealings of the state. But then I also don't think Henry was a good guy also in that whole ordeal. Because, I don't think the church should be used as a prop of the state. So, I don't know. I don't think Thomas should have been martyred. But yeah, that's a really interesting question. I guess, how about you? What do you feel? Is Thomas a Becket more right, less right? Are you in between?
Yes, I'm committed, yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else? Where do you see yourself? Brad?
Well, I was a little surprised when you described Leda to the murder cathedral. That it seemed to me you were being a little more sympathetic to the king than most clerics. But also, I think in popular culture and even in history, Becket is the more sympathetic character. Partly because of the religious person who was killed in the cathedral, that wasn't so. But have you seen the movie Becket?
I have not. I know Lori on screen was trying to get me to see it before this.
Well, I wonder if that might be a good thing to do. The actors are great, but the movie is, my recollection of it is really teens.
Uh-huh.
But it does tell the story, and it tells the story also of feelings of personal betrayal, and higher calling, and all that sort of thing. So, but I think your answer is right. They were both right, and they were both wrong. Henry VIII story also his dealings with his religious leaders and their
Yeah.
organizations. A lot. And Henry VIII was a tyrant. He was
Yeah.
an absolute ruler, and it became worse as he got older. And yet, he wanted to prevent the country from falling back into civil war.
Yeah.
That his grandfather had brought the country out of.
Yeah.
And restored order and prosperity and did a lot of good things. And the church's role in these things was not what you might think.
Yeah.
There was a lot of wealth, and as you point out, in the monasteries and bishops and religious leaders, cardinals were immensely wealthy.
Yeah.
So it does seem to me that you can make it on both sides. Henry VII, who brought the War of the Roses to an end, mother, Margaret
Mm-hmm.
was a very religious person.
Yeah.
She founded the two oldest endowed chairs in the English-speaking world, maybe the only two that still exist anywhere in the world. Both chairs of religion,
Uh-huh.
one at Oxford, one at Cambridge. She also founded colleges at Cambridge, which were more like seminaries
Yeah.
than universities, but still, she apparently instilled that what had learned in her son Henry VII, that he got out of his son.
Yeah.
Henry VIII took it too, and he was among other things, he was a musician, he was an athlete, he was a scholar.
The quintessential Renaissance man.
He wrote a back on Martin Luther that was good enough for the Pope in Rome to give him the title that King Charles III still uses.
Yeah. Defender of the faith.
So I think it's very human.
Yeah.
It's very mixed and very fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Cindy?
I thought monastic clergy is supposed to embrace a life of poverty. Is that just dependent on the order?
Yes. So Benedictines don't take any vow of poverty. Their vows are obedience, stability, and conversion. Only Franciscans take a vow of, like mendicant orders. So those are like minor orders. So Franciscans are a part of the mendicant orders. They take a vow of poverty. So like we have a mendicant order here in the Bay Area in this diocese, the Society of St. Francis. Their house is owned by the diocese, so they don't own anything. Their money is freely given, but they don't own anything other than their habit. And if someone asks for their habit, they're supposed to give it. But like they don't own the property that they're living on. The diocese gave them a lease of $0 for ever, essentially. So only mendicant orders. Mendicant means they take a vow of poverty. My Benedictines in South Africa made no such pledge, and they always reminded me of that. Any other questions? Yes.
How did Henry I, do you remember how he lost that or what? The church just became more powerful?
It was lost during the anarchy.
Okay.
Yeah. There was some sort of council, I don't remember the name of that Henry I did. But it was also an issue that the Holy Roman Empire was also going through. So the Pope was just like, hey, we did this here. Would this work for you? And Henry I was like, yeah, I think that's about right. And I guess where my confusion was, and I asked my canon to the ordinary back in Kansas City, because he's a medievalist, like literally studied that. Because I thought papal investiture meant the Pope picked who the bishop was, but I guess it had to do more at that time about the Pope needed the clergy to swear fealty to him for ecclesial matters and stuff like that. So there's this weird system where the clergy would swear fealty to their metropolitan or to their bishop, and that bishop had to swear fealty to their metropolitan, so that's the Archbishop of Canterbury. And then, so much so, though, that metropolitan, though, had to swear fealty to the Pope. So there's this long line of needing to show authority to the Pope, I guess, in some line. But then for the temporal power that English bishops had that wasn't always shared to the bishops in the mainland, they had to swear fealty to the king afterwards. So you actually still kind of see that in the coronation of Charles. The is it Lord Temporals or Lord Spirituals of the House of Lords still have to say an oath and swear fealty to the king. In their ordination, they take a vow to the king. Which in 2 weeks, we'll be talking about that when we talk about tech, or the Episcopal Church, because that was kind of the biggest issue for our clergy for supporting the revolution.
And that's why the churches that are shielded in the Episcopal Church across St. Andrews representing Scotland, as the Scottish bishops didn't have to say this to the king, so they could create a bishop. So the American clergy who wanted to become bishops and what became the Episcopal Church went to Scotland because the English bishops would have required the creation of a new bishop to be able to.
I mean, until we won. And then the English were like, fine, we won't make you take that vow. And we'll be talking about this in 2 weeks, but like Samuel Seabury was the one who went to Scotland to get ordained by the Scottish Episcopal Church bishops. They started because the bishops still wanted to, the Scottish bishops still wanted their own church, so they made their own Anglican church. But then the Church of Scotland went to reformed and got rid of bishops, but the bishops never relinquished their authority, so they started their own separate church. And it took a while for the Church of England to recognize that church, because the state official church is the Church of Scotland, which is reformed, so they don't have bishops. They just have pastors. Gets really confusing and meddlesome, but the non-jurors that's in Scotland ordained Samuel Seabury a bishop, but no one trusted that ordination because they weren't certain of the apostolic succession. So whenever Sam Seabury did an ordination after we won the revolution and we had our own bishops from the Church of England, they were always at his ordinations to confirm that the person was actually ordained. It's really complicated. We do a lot in the church for just to be safe. Rules.
Right?
Yes.
So, and this might be seem weird question. So when did things like nobody uses it, I've seen in the Episcopal Church or Anglican Church use the rosary? Or when did the confession, there's no more confession box that people go into. When did those changes start coming into play?
Yeah. So when did things like the rosary come about, and when did we stop? And things like the confession box. I would say the Reformation is when we kind of got rid of the confession box, but then we brought it back if you're in Anglo-Catholic parishes. Like St. Mary's Episcopal Church in Kansas City, that's the one I would go to sometimes. They have a confessions box. Yeah. Like we still have a rite of confession. We call it the reconciliation of a penitent in our Book of Common Prayer. But during the Reformation, we emphasized baptism and Eucharist and kind of did away with confession for a bit. There were a few American prayer books that added it back in, then it was taken out, and then we added it back in again, a kind of a back and forth. But we saw the general confession as being sufficient enough. The rosary, we actually still have a rosary. We call it Anglican prayer beads. It's different. Instead of 7 decades, it's 4 weeks. So 7 beads in 4 sections. I think that's right. But we call it the Anglican prayer beads. They look slightly different. You could also use a rosary, but the Reformation is when we kind of stopped some of that stuff. And it wasn't until the Anglo-Catholic movement that some of that became less looked down on in the Anglican Church.
We have a rosary, an Anglican rosary in the closet of the chapel upstairs.
Oh, okay.
Has a box with the Anglican rosary.
Very cool.
And there was a class where I think it was only 1 million where someone came and demonstrated the use of the prayer.
I mean, I have one that I bought at Canterbury Cathedral, so yeah, and they may have broken. I don't remember, but yeah. So we do have a prayer bead tradition.
Is it in the prayer book what you say in the beads?
Nope. That's all I have for you. But if you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you.
We should do a movie series.
Start with. Yep.